Few events in American history have left a deeper or more lasting mark than the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963. At just 46 years old, Kennedy became the youngest American president ever to die, and only the fourth to be assassinated, following Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, and William McKinley. In this episode of American Presidential History, we take you inside the story of that tragic day, exploring how the events unfolded and why the nation has never forgotten what happened in Dallas. When Kennedy entered the White House in January 1961, he carried with him a sense of promise unmatched by any modern president. He was youthful, articulate, energetic, and emblematic of a new era, one that Americans were eager to believe in after the anxieties of the 1950s. His eloquent inauguration speech called upon citizens to
"Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country."
For a moment, the United States seemed flooded with a sense of renewed optimism and excitement for progress, science, civil rights, and American leadership in the Cold War. This was the era of the Peace Corps, of early space exploration, of the young First Lady who transformed the White House into a place of culture and historical preservation. It is no wonder that the Kennedy years came to be romanticized as Camelot, a term Jacqueline Kennedy would later evoke as she shaped her husband's posthumous image. However, beneath the glamour lay an ugly political reality. The early 1960s were a time of deep ideological friction, and Kennedy, for all his charm, had accumulated dangerous enemies. Segregationists in the South raged against his growing involvement in civil rights. Ultra-conservatives in places like Texas believed he was steering America into liberal decline. Anti-Castro Cuban exiles felt betrayed by his failure to overthrow Fidel Castro after the Bay of Pigs, and organized crime figures nursed anger at the Kennedy administration's relentless prosecutions, many orchestrated by Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. Meanwhile, Cold War hardliners believed the president was too conciliatory toward the Soviet Union, especially after the Cuban Missile Crisis. In many ways, the national tensions that simmered beneath the surface of early 1960s America were on a collision course with Kennedy's own path. Dallas, Texas, had become a center of especially fierce hostility. Presidential advisors, including economist John Kenneth Galbraith, warned Kennedy that the political climate in Dallas was hostile. When Adlai Stevenson, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, visited Dallas in October 1963, he was jostled, spat upon, and struck with a cardboard protest sign. Kennedy knew Dallas would be hostile, yet he insisted on going. He believed that showing confidence, openness, and visibility was essential for a modern presidency, and he had a political goal to mend divisions within the Texas Democratic Party ahead of the 1964 election. Planning for the Texas trip proceeded with a sense of calculated risk. Although the Secret Service typically preferred closed vehicles in high-risk environments, Kennedy himself often insisted on using open-top limousines for political visibility. He wanted the crowds to see him clearly, to feel connected to their president. That decision, made out of political instinct and personal pride, would prove tragically fateful. The morning of November 22, 1963, began with enthusiasm. Air Force One landed at Love Field in Dallas at 11:37 a.m., and thousands of people greeted the President and First Lady. Jacqueline Kennedy, wearing her now iconic pink Chanel suit and pillbox hat, captivated the crowd. She had only recently returned from a long period of mourning following the death of their infant son Patrick earlier that year. The Kennedys spent several minutes greeting people at the airport before entering the open limousine that would carry them through Dallas. It was a bright, clear day. The motorcade moved slowly through downtown, its route deliberately planned so the president would be visible to as many people as possible. The sidewalks overflowed with spectators waving, cheering, holding signs, and standing on tiptoe to catch a glimpse. Kennedy sat in the back seat beside Jacqueline, waving and smiling, while Texas Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie sat ahead of them. At times, the crowds were so dense that the limousine slowed to a crawl. Secret Service agents, alert but relaxed, ran alongside or rode on the vehicle behind the president's car. As the motorcade approached Dealey Plaza shortly after 12:30 p.m., it prepared to make a sharp left turn in front of the Texas School Book Depository. The plaza was a funnel of open parkland, tall buildings, and railway yards, a visually striking space, but one that provided multiple elevated vantage points. As the limousine curved past the depository, Nellie Connally turned toward the president and said, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." It was the last friendly remark Kennedy ever heard. Almost instantly, a sharp cracking sound cut through the air. Many spectators later said they thought it was a firecracker. Others assumed it was the backfire of a motorcycle. In reality, it was the first rifle shot. What happened next would be replayed, reanalyzed, and relitigated for decades. The Zapruder film, captured by local dressmaker Abraham Zapruder, remains the most scrutinized home movie in American history. According to the Warren Commission, which investigated the assassination, the first shot likely missed the motorcade entirely, although some researchers disagree, suggesting it may have struck Kennedy first. What is certain is that within seconds, another shot was fired. This second shot entered Kennedy's upper back, exited through his throat, and continued forward, striking Governor Connally. Connally's chest collapsed inward, and he shouted, "My God, they're going to kill us all!" and then slumped into his wife's lap. The chaos inside the limousine was immediate, but the deadliest moment was still to come. A third shot was fired moments later. It struck President Kennedy in the head, sending a cloud of blood, bone, and tissue exploding outward. The horror of that scene, the instant in which the United States lost its elected leader, remains among the most disturbing images in American memory. Jacqueline Kennedy, in shock, instinctively crawled onto the back of the car, reaching for a fragment of her husband's skull. Secret Service agent Clint Hill sprinted toward the limousine, leapt onto the back, and shielded the First Lady with his body as the vehicle accelerated away. The motorcade sped toward Parkland Memorial Hospital. Kennedy arrived at Parkland around 12:38 p.m. Doctors rushed to save him, but his injuries were catastrophic. There was nothing to be done. At 1 p.m., President John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. A sense of stunned disbelief washed over the hospital staff, the Secret Service, the Vice President, the First Lady, and the journalists gathering outside. Even as the world reeled, Dallas police began piecing together what had happened. Witnesses reported seeing a man in the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository. Shortly after the assassination, a rifle, a 6.5mm Carcano, was discovered in the building. At around 1:16 p.m., Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit stopped a man who resembled the suspect description. The man, Lee Harvey Oswald, shot Tippit 4 times and fled on foot. He was arrested less than an hour later inside the Texas Theater. Oswald was brought to police headquarters, questioned for nearly 2 days, and formally charged with the murder of Officer Tippit and later President Kennedy. He denied everything, claiming, "I'm just a patsy." While the suspect sat in custody, Jacqueline Kennedy stood beside Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson aboard Air Force One as he took the presidential oath at 2:39 p.m. She refused to change out of her blood-stained suit, saying, "I want them to see what they have done." Johnson's face was solemn. The transition was both abrupt and shrouded in grief. Then, in yet another shocking turn, the only suspect in the assassination was himself murdered. On the morning of November 24th, as Oswald was being moved from the city jail to the county jail, nightclub owner Jack Ruby burst through the crowd of reporters and shot him in the stomach at point-blank range. Oswald collapsed, was taken to Parkland Hospital, the same hospital where Kennedy had died, and was pronounced dead. Millions watched the killing live on television. Ruby insisted he acted out of anger and grief, but his crime ensured that Oswald would never stand trial, never testify, never give his full version of the events. His death sealed the assassination in a cloud of mystery and suspicion that has never lifted. In the days that followed, the United States entered a period of mourning unlike anything seen since the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Jacqueline Kennedy became the central symbol of national loss. Perhaps the most unforgettable image was that of young John F. Kennedy Jr., just 3 years old, saluting his father's casket. The country watched in silence, their grief reflected in the solemn faces lining Pennsylvania Avenue. President Johnson established the Warren Commission to investigate the assassination. Led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, the commission concluded in 1964 that Lee Harvey Oswald had acted alone, firing 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, and that no credible evidence of a conspiracy existed. Yet many Americans doubted this conclusion almost immediately. Critics argued that the investigation had been rushed, that the evidence was incomplete, and that the single bullet theory used to explain the injuries to Kennedy and Connally was implausible. Autopsy materials had been handled inconsistently. Intelligence agencies had withheld key information from both the commission and each other, and the fact that Oswald had been murdered before trial left enormous gaps in the narrative. Over time, additional investigations cast further doubt on the lone gunman conclusion. In 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations suggested that Kennedy was probably assassinated as the result of a conspiracy, based in part on acoustic evidence that later came under dispute. Still, the committee acknowledged that uncertainties and withheld information plagued every level of inquiry. Subsequent releases of CIA and FBI files revealed that both agencies had monitored Oswald long before 1963 and had failed to share critical intelligence. Other documents revealed conflicting testimony about Oswald's alleged trip to Mexico City, where he supposedly met with Soviet and Cuban officials, a mystery that continues to fuel debate. Theories proliferated. Some pointed to rogue elements within the CIA angered by Kennedy's handling of Cuba. Others accused the mafia, motivated by Robert Kennedy's crackdown on organized crime. Anti-Castro Cuban militants were also suspected, some believing Kennedy had betrayed them after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. Soviet involvement was considered but lacked evidence. And then there were the witnesses who swore they heard shots from the grassy knoll, insisting that the fatal shot came from the front, not the rear. For many Americans, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy became the ultimate mystery, the event that shattered trust in government and marked the beginning of a generation's disillusionment. Beyond the investigations and theories, the assassination transformed the nation in practical ways. The Secret Service underwent sweeping reforms, redesigning presidential protection from top to bottom. Armored vehicles became standard. Advanced teams performed more thorough route analysis. Counter-sniper units appeared at major events. Public access to presidents became more limited. The modern bubble surrounding American leaders, one built of glass, metal, and agents, was born on that November day. But deeper changes rippled outward as well. The assassination was the first in a tragic chain of political and cultural upheavals that defined the late 1960s, including the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy. The escalation of the Vietnam War, urban unrest, and widespread distrust in public institutions. What had begun as a decade of hope shifted abruptly into turmoil. Kennedy's death was the pivot point. For many, the story of the assassination may never be resolved, but what remains certain is that November 22nd, 1963 will forever be the day that America went silent when the life of its youngest elected president and the first to be born in the 20th century came to a sudden and violent end.
My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man. Finally, whether you are citizens of America or citizens of the world, ask of us here the same high standards of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you. With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking His blessing and His help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own.
Although John F. Kennedy remains the last president of the United States to have been assassinated while in office, he was not the first. That distinction belongs to President Abraham Lincoln. You can check out the full story in our next episode.